And not one time do they ask, did you go to a weld school? No, they don't ask that ever. All they do, they tell you to fit a branch up. If you can't fit that branch, whoosh, see ya. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Well, we've been stringing some pipe out and doing just a bunch more random welds, so I'm not going to bore you with a video on that. What I am going to do is try to answer a bunch of questions all at once. Now, let me start by saying this is not a how-to video. It's not a union versus non-union video. I'm only going to explain the path that I took to get to where I am today. And currently, I am a weld foreman for a union contractor working pipeline. So I'm not going to put no words in anybody's mouth on the non-union side. I'm really not concerned with it. And I'm not going to, tell you a how-to on how to do, how to become a pipeliner on the union side. There's just not a step-by-step, and by the time you get down here, you're a pipeliner. It's just not how this works. What I am going to do is at least tell you my experience, and you can take that for what it's worth. I've tried to do this video about 15 times now, so I'm going to do my best not to ramble and not repeat myself over and over again. So here we go. Let me start by saying, at the end of this video, there's one thing that is very true. I'm not going to say it's 100%, but in almost all cases, there's one thing that's going to hold true to you becoming a pipeliner. So stick around and all the dots will connect by the time we're done. My whole career basically started whenever I was old enough to hand my dad a channel locks. My dad was a non-union plumber my whole life. So ever since I was old enough to, hand him a wrench or carry a piece of pipe or hand him fittings, under crawl spacers or whatever, I was going with my dad to service calls, put new plumbing in houses, whatever. Every summer, on the weekends, whatever. I put pipe together my whole life. When I was in high school, having gone in and out of these supply houses and stuff like that with my dad over the years, I got to know the owner of a supply house close to home. So during high school, they hired me, and I was, filling orders, making deliveries, stuff like that. It was a good fit for me for a high school job. Worked well for them because I basically, I'll say I knew everything, but I was very familiar with what they sold. I was in and out of there all the time buying stuff. So it worked out really well for them and me. Well, I knew that wasn't going to be my career. So while I was in high school, still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I figured I'd bide some time, and I joined the military. I signed up for the Illinois Army National Guard, and I think I tested, it was like a 87 on my ASVAB. So I tested really high, and the unit that was closest to my house was field artillery. Well, my recruiter was not going to let me be in the field artillery. I think they were short on signal corps unit guys, so I ended up becoming signal, which you had to test high in order to be signal because it's all phones, internet, stuff like that. So I ended up joining the signal corps, and after my basic and AIT, I still had no clue what I wanted to do, but like I said earlier, I knew the plumbing side of, the trade. So I figured I'd sign up for classes at Rankin Technical College in St. Louis, Missouri. And they had a plumbing technology course, so I signed up for it. I went to school there for the fall semester, and let's see, it was January of 06. We ended up getting deployed. So I did 2 semesters there at Rankin, got deployed, and went to Iraq for my deployment. Was about 17 and a half months long. We deployed, had a bunch of training, stuff like that. So I was gone from school for 2 years, basically. I got done with the deployment and went back to Rankin to finish my certificate of technology. And this whole time I kept going in and out of working at that supply house. I had a good relationship with the owner. He took care of me whenever I needed a job. He had one for me because I made it worth his while. I was a good hand. Well, after I graduated Rankin Tech, I basically had all my eggs in one basket. I was going to have to be a plumber because that's just where I had headed with my life. I knew it. It wasn't challenging per se as far as You know, I didn't have to learn a bunch of stuff, but I always challenged myself anyways, no matter what I do. So I basically just started plumbing right out of Rankin. What happened was, while I was working at that plumbing supply house, I was running deliveries, filling orders, stuff like that. Well, you're always being watched by somebody. And what happened was, there was a contractor that was in and out of that supply house all the time, and he noticed me. I was, you know, every time he'd see me, I was always working hard. I was doing something always. You know, I was never sitting around talking, you know, just hanging out. I was always busy, you know, doing my job. Well, that contractor kind of has that reputation of, you know, they were a great contractor to work for because they held everybody to a higher standard. And it showed when they were done with something, because you never went back. You know, everything was done right. And, you know, a person could have a lot of pride in what they did at the end of the day working for that contractor, because, like I said, you were held to a higher standard. Well, that contractor noticed me there. So what happened was, I got done with Rankin and I needed to, you know, carry on with my career. So they hired me, and they were a union contractor. So I ended up getting in the union hall. Well, I came in under the Helmets to Hard Hat program. If you're military, they can bring you in under that, and you start as a second-year apprentice. Well, the state plumbing license requires a 4-year apprenticeship to be a licensed plumber in Illinois. Well, I came into a 5-year apprenticeship as a second-year apprentice, so it worked out really good. You know, I was going to be an apprentice for 4 years anyways, so it just worked out. Well, what ended up happening was, in order to, you know, top out as a journeyman in a union hall, our union hall specifically, you either had to have a plumbing license or a welding certification. Well, when I first got in the hall, that was the first time I ever struck an arc in my life. I never welded, didn't know anything about it, and quite frankly, I didn't even care about it at the time. I had no idea that I'd even be good at it or not. So part of our apprenticeship classes was you had to learn how to weld. So I kind of just naturally took to it. You know, the instructor, whenever he was teaching, you know, our classes, he basically explained, like, you know, either you're going to be able to weld or you're not. It's a very difficult trade to teach somebody. Like, you just have to weld to learn how to do it. You can't watch videos, you can't read books, and all of a sudden know how to do it. You just got to do it. There's hundreds and hundreds of pounds of welding rod or wire or whatever you're going to learn. It just takes time to do it. And in that time, either it clicks or it don't. You know, I mean, I'm not trying to, you know, be proud or nothing like that, but it's not a craft that you can force. So if you're year 3 into trying to learn how to weld, you probably just might as well pick something different, because it's not something that you want to fight every single day of your life. I'm not saying I'm very good at welding or not, but I still fight it every day of my life. And, you know, I've been making it for a little bit. But anyway, I ended up getting in the union hall and started my apprenticeship. Well, a couple years into my apprenticeship, still working for the same contractor, I get deployed to Afghanistan. This time we're, instead of being signal, we reclassed to engineers. And that's another thing. An engineer in the military, there's horizontal or vertical. We were horizontal, so equipment operators, stuff like that. If you don't know what you're going to do as far as a career or with your life, the military has every single job that the civilian market has. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, a plumber, a welder, a truck driver, a mechanic, you name it, they have it in the military. So if you're not making it and you don't think there's any way that you can make ends meet or whatever, it's because you don't want to. It's that simple. Because the military is always available, and I promise you there's a job in the military for you. And if there ain't, they'll teach you one. But anyway, got deployed to Afghanistan. When I came back, work was so slow, there was nothing going on. So I ended up just looking for work somewhere else. And I ended up going to work at a car dealership as a car salesman, believe it or not. I did that for almost 6 months. it actually worked out okay. I wasn't the greatest, but I also wasn't trying very hard, because in the back of my mind I had, a backup plan already. I was gonna be a plumber or pipe fitter. I was basically just, filling time in until work picked up again. So I didn't really commit to being a salesman. But anyway, not that I wanted to be one anyways, which was part of the reason why I didn't do as well as I probably could have. Anyway, became a salesman. Well, after work started picking back up again, I was still going through my apprenticeship classes and all that stuff, because no matter what, I was still a union member and I had to finish my classes in order to top out. Finished my apprenticeship classes, and in that time, I had met a couple people that had worked pipeline for a local contractor that works pipeline all the time. And what happened was I became buddies with those guys, and not that we're buddies or whatever, but they knew I worked hard. They seen that I was willing to put the time in, put the effort in. And what ended up happening was one of them guys recommended me to a welder that was needing a helper, and I ended up going out as a helper. I was topped out as a journeyman at that time. I had finished all my classes, and literally I topped out as a journeyman, and 3 days later I was out as a helper on a pipeline job. Not that that has anything to do with it, but I was done with my apprenticeship, so I could have done pretty much anything in the union hall as far as going to work at a refinery or whatever. But I went out as a helper. And in my mind, I told myself, I'm either going to learn this and figure it out, or I'm going to go right back to plumbing, and that's what I'm going to do. Whenever I went out as a helper, I wasn't that guy out on the job site just collecting a check. I was taking my hood with me, to every single bell hole. Every time we'd set up a piece of fab or something, I had my welding hood right there, watching those welders. Because that's another thing in our union hall. Nothing against our union hall, but a lot of building trades, there's a difference between building trades and pipeline. And a lot of times, building trades guys don't want nothing to do with pipeline guys. Don't know what the deal is. Don't really care what the deal is, but that's just how it is. Nobody taught me how to downhill. Up until now, all I'd ever done was uphill. On chill water piping and stuff like that, learning how to TIG weld, and be a combo welder, stuff like that. Nobody would teach me how to downhill. So I was taking my hood and watching these guys weld every single day. We were on 610 job. I'll never forget this. 610 job, hour and a half from the house. Thankfully, in this line of work, that's not super common to be that close to the house. Well, anyway, I was watching them guys weld all day, every single day. And what I would do is, if you're in a union hall, you can go to that union hall anytime. Use their facilities, use their weld machines, use their welding rods, do whatever you want to do to learn. So what I would do is I'd get off working 610s, you're off 5:30, drive an hour and a half home, sit in that union hall and weld for about 3-4 hours every single night. Every night. Not one night did I miss, because I had it in my mind I was either going to do it or I wasn't going to do it. One or the other. I started out I'd tack a piece of 16-inch up, and I never even welded the top of a piece of pipe for probably the first month. All I did was just pad the bottom of that pipe over and over and over again. As soon as I'd get that whole stick, not a whole stick, but like a 5-foot section of pipe, I'd get that whole bottom padded, I'd cut the tacks, roll it a quarter turn, do it again. I just kept beating myself up on that bottom, because either you figure it out or you don't. But what I would do is I'd watch them guys weld, and I'd go back to that hall and I would try to do everything that they did that day on that piece of pipe. And by the time I got done, through that job, I think that job was about 4 months long, 3 or 4 months long. By the time I was done with that job, I had gone from padding a piece of pipe to beveling them, fitting them up, putting bead in, actually welding them out, to just screwing up the fits, taking it real wide, making high-low terrible, because that's one thing you will learn. If you ever break out welding, your weld test is going to be the easiest weld you make, because that is in the most controlled environment you're going to be in. You're usually on stands or on a horse or something, it's tacked up the gap you want all the way around. It's fit up as well as you can fit it up. And then after that, you're in a ditch or on skids, or, you know, it's not the easiest welds after that day. So I digress. I had in my head that I was going to be a welder. So I taught myself how to weld, basically. I'd go back to work, ask questions, come back to the hall that night, and try and do it on the pipe. Well, I'll never forget this either. The welder that I was helping at the time was going to buy a new rig. And I wasn't helping him anymore when he finally bought a new rig. I was actually working down in Louisiana with that same company, but helping a different welder. And he told me he was going to sell his truck. So I said, hey, I'm a buyer. You know, if you're going to sell it, you know, I'm used to the truck. I'm used to the machine. He's going to sell a machine too. So I bought the truck and machine. And that's another thing I'm going to tell you guys. Don't borrow a penny. There's zero reason you need to borrow a penny to start welding. SA200, $2,500, $5,000. I mean, if you buy a $5,000 SA200, you're going to work on it just as much as a $2,500 SA200. So buy a $2,500 SA200. Welding machine, I said it in a previous video. Buy twice the machine you think you need and half the truck. You don't need a brand new F350 or, you know, a new dually with a slick welding bed. None of that crap. Get a 3/4 ton truck, throw the machine in the back, put some leads on it, and practice. Practice until you know you can take a test and pass it. Anyway, I had in my head that I wanted to weld. Bought that rig. And at that time, I'd just gotten married. And my wife and I made the decision that we put the money up for the truck, put the money up for the machine. I tooled it out, you know, just basic hand tools, torch, you know, the stuff you need. Bought all that stuff, and we made a deal that if I was not broke out welding in 6 months, it was all getting sold and I was going back to plumbing, and that was the end of the story. So, set a goal for yourself. You know, if I wouldn't have set that goal, and I see it all the time with people, they say, oh, later, next time, next weld, you know, or the next job, or next year. Well, that never ends if you don't set a goal for yourself. Made a hard deadline, and basically I was in our hall taking a test to be a combo welder because I was going to go to a refinery and just, you know, uphill weld until work picked up on pipeline. Well, I'm literally in the booth taking that weld test, and I get a phone call to take my very first downhill test the next day. And that was history. I mean, I literally left that test. I didn't even finish that test. Went, packed all my stuff up, and drove to go take my test the next morning. Until that day, I'd never welded a branch before in my life. And I'll never forget, I'd watched a couple guys fit a branch up and weld a branch out, so I knew what to do. I just had never done it myself. Ended up taking the test and passed it, and I've been welding ever since. Well, when I first started welding, it was for a distribution contractor, and really that's the best way to start breaking out. If anybody ever asks me, I tell them break out on distribution contractor, because most of the stuff's never x-rayed. You basically get paid to practice all day long. Your truck's on the payroll. That's number one. Get that truck on the payroll, because if it's not making you money, it's costing you money. Then, I mean, you put a couple punch tees on, or service tee, or transition here and there on a distribution contractor. So in the meantime, cut some pups, weld them together, you know, that's just how it goes. But ever since then, I've just basically slowly been moving, you know, taking on more responsibilities and learning the pipeline side of things. And anyway, that's kind of my story. And again, it's not a step-by-step. I know I rambled through there a bunch, and I'm going to try to keep all the cuts to a bare minimum. But I did promise you guys at the end of the video, I'll tell you the number one thing that's going to help you become a pipeliner, and that's to know somebody. And I'm not saying that to like kind of pop a balloon or burst your bubble or whatever, but if I wouldn't have known them guys, that were working pipeline and they recommended me, I could have been the hardest working, best welding, pipe fitter on the planet, but it wouldn't have mattered because there's just, the pipeline community is such a small community. You don't think it is, but there's not a lot of people that do this line of work. And the thing with pipeline, just like this YouTube channel, if it happens anywhere on pipeline, you might as well shout it down the pipe because everybody knows about it like that. And I think I had like 2 videos up and I was getting phone calls, texts, people give me all sorts of hard times about it, whatever. But it's a small world, and unless you can chisel your way in by knowing somebody or getting that recommendation from someone, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be a very difficult road. And I'm here to tell you right now, your certificate or your degree from, some weld school, Lincoln Weld School, Hobart, whatever. I don't even know them because it doesn't matter. None of those schools matter. They may teach you how to weld, but that ain't going to matter once you get out here because you take a test every job you go to and you take a test every 6 months minimum if you work for the same gas company. So there might be days, there's literally guys that'll have half a dozen or more papers or certifications from different gas companies in a year. I mean, that's nothing, because every time you hire in, you got to take another weld test, and not one time do they ask, did you go to a weld school? No, they don't ask that ever. All they do, they tell you to fit a branch up. If you can't fit that branch, whoosh, see ya. Next. So I'm not saying don't go to school, but 99% of the time, it's a complete waste of time. Most of the guys that graduate, and I can say this from experience, most of the guys that graduate from them schools are making 30 bucks an hour at some factory somewhere, hating their lives, but they're home every night. I'm home most of the time. I got lucky, got hooked up with a gas company that's close to home. But there again, going back to like I was telling you, somebody's always watching you. You work hard, you put out good product, and you take pride in what you do, they're going to notice it. That gas company that you're working for, if you're doing a good job for them, they may request that you get hired by a contractor that comes in there next year. It's happened. Not so much to me, but I've heard of the people. I know the guys personally that do all the weld tests for this gas company, and they literally will tell contractors when they come in, hey, this guy's a good welder or this guy's a good welder. If you're looking for hands, these guys would be, worth your time. So, like I said, someone's always watching. If you don't take pride in what you do or what you have, if you don't care, what does that tell the people that you're working for? Whether it be the contractor or the gas company. If you don't care about, what you're doing, they're certainly not going to care if you're there doing it. So just keep that in mind. I don't mean to keep going on rambling, but like I said, I owed you guys a video. Hopefully this helps somebody. And I probably should have said it at the beginning of the video, but like the video, comment, subscribe. Like I said, video's doing way better than I ever thought, or the channel's doing way better than I ever thought. Heck, we're almost at 4,000 subscribers already. Still can't hardly believe it. So stay tuned, check out my Instagram page, and hopefully we'll get some cool stuff up later. Until next time, have a good one.